Shalom. Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. As you know, these podcasts are designed to examine various aspects of the impact of the revolution in longevity on ourselves, our families, our communities. And we are very, very pleased to welcome to today's show Carol Orsborn, the author of Spiritual Aging, and a slew of other books. But we're going to concentrate on this recently published book. Carol, hi, welcome.
Hey,
welcome.
Thank you. I've been wanting to be on your show for many years, so this is a triumph for me.
Well, it's triumph for us. Here we are. So it's nice to see you. It's
Thank
nice
you.
to see you. Spiritual Aging, Weekly Reflections for Embracing Life. So let me get right to the beginning here. There's an introduction by a colleague of ours. In fact, one of his books is right over my shoulder over there, Rick Moody, who writes, Spiritual Aging argues that the primary task of development in the second half of life is to achieve some degree of detachment from all the busyness, frenzy, and overactivity that defines success in earlier life stages to make space for new life to emerge, unquote. Talk to me about that very, very lovely paragraph, because there's a lot of messages in there. Go ahead.
I'll add another layer of complexity to it because Rick Moody is the busiest, most productive guy. He's just turned 80, I think. And
Yep.
There's just no stopping him. He is single-handedly attempting to save the world. But he understands, as do I, that pull to stay and continue to make a contribution. But he also understands that every life stage has its own purpose and meaning. And many people who try and maintain that pace and that intensity of what they were doing in midlife are completely missing the spiritual attributes and acts and aspects of living spirituality as an experience of aging, and aging as a spiritual experience.
Your body also sends you a little message, right? I mean, I may want to still do the things the way I did them when I was 35, but my body sends me regular messages of saying, not now.
Right. So, many of the philosophers ask the question, what is the evolutionary purpose of growing old then? And what is the spiritual purpose? Because if we physically can't keep up unless we do ourselves harm, then, what happens as a positive when we go slower? And do we start paying attention to different aspects of what it means to be fully human? And the irony from the spiritual masters and teachers and my own experience, what it's taught me is that aging as a spiritual experience, the very things that we dread about aging contain the gifts that advance us as humans trying to do good in the world.
So you talk about the spiritual aspect of aging. America still sees aging as a medical model. That's a question. In your experience and your writing, we're still in America seeing this as a medical model as opposed to the spiritual journey of growing older. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, so I got my doctorate in history and critical theory of religion from Vanderbilt, and I studied the life cycle. And what I began noticing is that all of our greatest social scientists all had life peaking at somewhere between 6 years of age and maybe in our 20s or 30s. And that definitely had to do with the seeing, say, age 40 and beyond as a time of physical and mental decline. So by medical model, I'm sure that's what you're talking about. We lose our strength, we lose a certain kind of cognitive power. But none of the social scientists, and certainly the medical establishment, saw the benefits that come in with older age. That was left to the mystics and to people who were working on things like lessening of the ego. I mean, how many of us have sat on meditation pillows trying to have our egos be less dominant on us and come more from love and selflessness and things like that? I know I've spent many, many hours on meditation pillows, but nothing brought me closer to losing my ego than looking in the mirror a few days ago. So, you know,
Yeah, yeah. We've all been there in the morning. Turn on the light and say, "Whoa, who are you? You know,
right, right,
where'd you come from?" You know.
right. Well,
Yeah.
I personally have learned and believe that the purpose of life is to go from power and arrogance to humility, and out of humility, compassion. I think that's the real arc of life. And I don't think that true humility and compassion start for most of us until the physical manifestations, the material manifestations begin to erode. And then we go deeper and deeper and deeper. And, it's just completely opposite because, what most people think, the closer to death you get, the less you have to offer, the more marginalized you are, uh, the sadder it is. But people who have a spiritual practice and who can start the spiritual practice in enough time, but they've practiced it, actually approach the closer they get to death is more and more freedom and more liberation to be authentic and to be a fully evolved human being.
Yeah, and the lovely thing about Judaism and Jewish text, and we teach this as part of the Jewish Sacred Aging workshops, um, is the prayers themselves. If you look at them a certain way, they really underscore exactly what you said. That in many ways you just have to have been around the block a couple of times to really begin to understand what these words mean in the truth. Many of us, me included, have gotten into trouble by saying to people in classes or synagogues, Judaism really isn't for children. It's not. Not that there's anything wrong with the kids, but you really, when you live life a little bit and then you study these texts, and all of a sudden these texts take on meaning, saying, yes, I've lived that. I understand what they're talking about now. It's this search for a mature spirituality that I think has given rise, especially in recent years with the boomers. And I really think the boomers were the catalyst for this, of really expanding the desire to really have adult conversations about their religious traditions and how those traditions can impact their lives. I know we're seeing it within the Jewish community more than I think ever before, for a whole variety of reasons. I got to ask you though about the book itself. I can put the book in my pocket. You told me before we started the taping that your request was that the book look like this and not a bigger book. Why? It's because this is unique. And also, while you're answering that, how you structured it, because it's on yearly reading cycles, almost like the Torah.
You're right. Yeah, and I'm doing a study guide that I think is very Talmudic,
Oh,
very, very much asking questions and taking a look at the text and questioning it. If I had my complete druthers, it would have a furry cover because I think of this as a companion.
sorry.
I wish
Uh,
furry, I wish I could pet it. It's kind of that kind of a book. I have some favorite books like that, the 12-step programs are great. They have daily and weekly meditation books. And I love that format because I think a lot of books you read once, a regular sized book, you read it from cover to cover, it really impacts you greatly. And then you put it down and you move on to other books. But I think it takes a lot of sinking in deeper to revisit the material over and over again. And I did a research study and found out that 2 years is a good cycle to really absorb a message. And that this book is 2 years of weekly readings. Each is about a page long. And you're supposed to spend the week thinking about that particular subject. And it's everything from grieving to jealousy to looking in the mirror and regretting how you're looking. It's to somebody's just died. It's the whole range of anything that can possibly come up for you in a 2-year period after age 50 or so. And there's an index in the back where, in case that week's reading is not your particular subject, Like, let's say you come to a reading about joy and you're very sad. It doesn't, it's still fine to read about joy when you're sad. In fact, it's maybe a good thing. But if you want something that's more supportive and more to the point, you go to the index and you look up the word that you're feeling, and then it'll take you to that particular reading.
Yeah, it's a very comprehensive index. It really is.
Yeah.
And it does. It gives you a variety, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 6 options of reading in the page numbers. So it's user friendly.
Oh,
Just
great. Thank
very
you.
user friendly. You have this wonderful quote from the 4th week of April.
Okay.
Okay, goes like this, and it's around one of the things that comes up all the time in our workshops, and that's this idea of control.
Oh, yeah.
You say, now that we are old, the losses have mounted, and the promise of gaining control has crumbled. To continue to throw ourselves into the rubble searching for the key when we should already know better is hubris. It's a great line. It is God's job to do the final summation, not ours. It's part of spiritual aging, knowing when to say, I cede control of the world and everything. I'm just going to worry about X. Talk to me a little bit about how you view this idea, or what I call the myth of control.
Right. Well, I would say the opposite of control is faith. And aging really tests our faith. If at a younger age, we thought God gave us good things as rewards, we find ourselves at an age and stage in life where we can't control bad things from happening, and it's easy to flip and to think that God is punishing us. So, faith means to me that we are beloved no matter what. And as Einstein said, this is a friendly universe. And it does force us to go much deeper in our relationship with trying to understand who God is to us. Is God our delivery boy delivering upon our wishes? Or is, I love some stories from a Jewish tradition that describe God as the one who is there with us when we're suffering, not the one that's giving us the pain. God is, let me put it this way. If everything God gives us is a gift, I hope God takes returns. I don't want all of God's gifts. But I really, I just have to, I don't have that much time left. I'm 77. That's plenty of time in one way, but in another, I don't want to spend hopefully the next 20 years being mad at God or regretting things that happened that I've already atoned for, or worrying about things that may not happen. I mean, there's so many ways to waste this time of our lives, but it takes faith, and it takes discipline and courage and knowledge and wisdom to live this time in the way that I believe evolution is demanding of us. If we're only willing to rise to the occasion of fulfilling life's promise, then it's a huge leap of faith, and it's a much different way of living in the world.
What's God to you, though?
I just take it to the very simplest of all levels. I believe God is love. I see God as unconditional love. And I think the reason that we don't all live with God and the world doesn't live with God is because we block that.
What do you mean? What are we afraid of then?
Well, I think it starts very young. Again, remember, I got my doctorate in the human life cycle. So when a baby is born and I believe they came from love. I think probably the experience they were having in the amniotic sac or whatever was the best kind of love, where you don't even know you're being loved. You're just immersed in it, in a state of being and flow. And then you're pulled out of that and into a very rude world that's cold and slaps you to cry. And you're taken from your mother to all these, machinery and everything. And I think probably at a very, very young age, we get scared and manipulative. We need to get fed. We need to get loved. Some kids develop personalities around, oh, if I'm really cute, mom will feed me. And, some develop personalities. If I scream my head off, I'll get fed. And it goes from there. It's like, you know, in the younger years, you're seeking approval and survival. Then you hit adolescent, and then you often are a knee-jerk reaction to whatever persona you put together to get you by that far. But as long as you're in, even if adolescent rebellion is still in relationship to the things that formed you, and so what is freedom? A lot of young people, and even people our age, who are still in adolescence, they're running around and drinking, and they're in their nursing homes having sex with everybody. You can be an adolescent at every age, as long as it's a knee-jerk reaction to the original programming that you're kicking against. So I think the evolutionary purpose of aging is to finally break free from both our original reactive programming that was all about winning approval and survival, and then to break away from all of our programming, which is a knee-jerk reaction to that, the false sense of I'm me, look at me, and then we have to cycle through a whole lot of spiritual pitfalls. The whole thing that was happening for me in my 40s and 50s, that I could control God by praying enough and eating enough tofu and meditating and being a good person, all that stuff. I had this reward and punishment thing going, but it was just dressed up in like new age jargon. And, finally I hit breast cancer at a young age, I have to say. So if I'm a prodigy, it's because I had breast cancer when I was 49.
Right.
And, that really put me into the more serious questions and literature at a much younger age. And so, as I was going through my doctorate, and it was a later in life doctorate, and as I began teaching what I was learning, I refused to say anything superficial. If my belief about spirituality couldn't be spoken to somebody dying in pain, then I didn't believe it to be true. So, I didn't want to outgrow this message, and I don't believe I will.
As we get older, is the approval we are seeking not necessarily from other people, but our own self and soul?
Well, that would be nice. But I'm sure you're faced with this too. As a teacher working with older people, I've got a lot of people coming to me and asking, am I doing aging right?
Yeah. Well,
what does that mean? There's terrible competition in nursing homes between whose kid comes to visit more,
Yes.
how, and so to hold your center, to take whatever ramifications have happened because of your life choices, the good and the bad, and to hold your center in that, then you get to the place you're talking about of, giving yourself approval. But it takes a lot of psychological and spiritual growth. And I don't know, Maslow, who's one of the psychologists that I studied, he had this hierarchical pyramid. He believed the 4% of the population ever get to the place of self-approval. He called it self-actualization, 4%. And so, I think that's about right. I think, maybe it's even generous. And maybe the numbers are changing a little bit. I think because of COVID, and I think because of the times that we're in right now, I think the great awakener is understanding you really aren't in control.
Oh.
So complacency is the enemy of spiritual growth. And it's very hard to be complacent now, although many people are. Denial is the go-to drug in our society.
Yes. Available anywhere, not even by prescription. We're speaking with Carol Orsborn, the author of Spiritual Aging, here on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning from Jewish Sacred Aging. And again, if you'd like to make a comment or have a concern or suggestion, please email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit us on the Facebook page, the website. If you'd like to support our work on the website, jewishsacredaging.com, there's a very conveniently located donate button, and we appreciate any support that you can give us. So, Carol, there's this wonderful quote that you have in the middle of the book for the first week in December, which goes like this. The spiritual life does not take away our loneliness. It protects and cherishes it as a precious gift, an invitation to transcend our limitations and look beyond the boundaries of our existence. That's almost a positive approach to loneliness when we're being now inundated with this epidemic of loneliness, which is causing significant mental health issues in the country. But here you have this lovely quote of saying, you know something, sometimes this loneliness can protect, and it is a gift. What do you make of that quote?
Well, first of all, I think the notion of loneliness as a disease is a culturally created and very closely related to ageism and our society's emphasis on youth and power. I think it's very societally based, and we're talking about approval. People who think that you have to be have lots of friends and be popular and social at our age, and you're not, then you feel like you failed somehow.
Sorry.
But
Right. Like high school.
it is like high school. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Aging doesn't have to be like high school. If you look into the contemplative traditions, and Judaism also has a really big contemplative tradition, but so do Hindus and Buddhists. The idea of spending long periods of time alone, even be living in a cave for years, is considered to, well, also the Jewish scholar, the Talmudic scholar, that's immersed in contemplation of the texts. It's like we don't judge a young man who spends hours and hours and hours alone and is not a very social person. I don't think we just say, different people, different lifestyles suit different people, and some people are meant to be contemplative at the beginning or end or even middle of life. And I think I'm one of them. I think I'm personally an introvert that really does best. I think it's why I'm a writer. And it takes a year to write a book, and I'm not socializing all that much when I'm writing. And writing is how I pray. It's how I communicate with God. And I've done it, 36 times in a row. That's 36 years. So, I live very much a contemplative lifestyle, and I've never once thought of myself, well, no, that's not true. If I look at myself through my own eyes, which is increasingly easy in older age, then I say to myself, I celebrate the fact that I have a contemplative spirit and that I love solitude. I've cherished the time out in the garden, listening to music. I cherish that. And when I don't look at myself through my own eyes, if I look at myself through somebody else's eyes, I might think to myself, oh my God, they're on their 4th cruise of the year and they play Trivial Pursuits and they're, a president of Hadassah or whatever, what's wrong with me,
Yes, right.
So our
right.
society, just unlike other societies, if you want to be contemplative, then you have to go against the tide. That's why we're back to that 4% number that Maslow gave. And if you don't recognize that the conflict is not internal, it's external, you're fighting with society, and you want to be that internal person, you might label it loneliness and label it a sickness, and then you create your own illness out of that.
No, I think the way you're approaching it and the understanding it, the mediaization, which is probably not a word.
I love that, actually.
of a term like loneliness, because I've talked to people who say, I go to my gar, especially women who go to the gar or people who go to the ocean and they say that's I feel refreshed there. That's where I get in touch with myself. I don't need to sit in a meeting, or I don't need to be the, because like most things, and like caregiving, how we grow older is purely personal. I'm convinced of it now. I'm convinced of it. There is no right or wrong.
No.
And the idea of what you're trying to do with spiritual aging is giving these little contemplative sentences, paragraphs to say, oh, now go think about this. And if it moves you to do this, Kol hakavod, great. If it moves you to do that, that's equal. You're not saying here, this is the right way to do things or this is the wrong way to do things. That's a gift. That's a freedom, I think, that comes when you really sit down and analyze the difference between getting older and growing older. That loneliness, or the difference between being alone and really being pathologically dealing with loneliness and cut off. There's a Hebrew phrase can mean karet, which means cut off, and cut off from everybody. That's that person in the nursing home right now who has no visitors, who literally is cut off from everything and may only be touched by a nurse or a health person moving them. That's a whole different ball game. But you're right. The vocabulary, especially in our society, it's very challenging. One of the other things that you alluded to before, and this goes to a series of tensions that we talk about a lot in our work, one of them being acceptance versus surrender. And you alluded to this, the fact that we come to a point in time, perhaps, when we say, okay, this is who I am. I accept it. I've seen this a lot with people who have serious or chronic illness. And they'll say, yeah, okay, I have cancer. I'm dealing with this. Or MS. I'm dealing with this. I accept this, but it's not going to get in the way of me living.
Right.
Talk to me about that and how your experience with that and your writing about that.
Well, I think you make a decision about how you're going to live your life. And sometimes you have to make that decision 10 times a day because, when you're old, the hits keep coming. You keep finding occasions to rise to, and just when you think you've got some equanimity, you're challenged again. I've decided that there's two irrevocable pieces, and only two, to spiritual aging successfully. And that is, the first is that you forgive reality for what it can't help being. It's beyond acceptance. It's saying, I'm not going to hold a grudge against it. I'm going to live in the moment, and this is the reality I'm being faced with. And I'd rather embrace the whole thing with sort of a bittersweet compassion. And let me just interrupt right here. I think our society places such a high and erroneous value on happiness. And, I think happiness is so ephemeral. And the older we get, as you lose friends, as you lose physical abilities, you learn how to live with a certain degree of sadness that makes you feel grounded and whole. You're less likely to be holding it onto it in a frenetic, scared way. You're going to be less scared. If you can just get beyond the worry and the self-hatred and the regret and all that stuff. True freedom is in getting beyond all that. And sometimes the only way to do that is forgive reality for what it can't help being. So that's the first principle. The second principle is, as I alluded to before, that we are beloved unconditionally. And we cannot discover that our belovedness is not conditional unless there's things wrong. It's like if you're the perfect person and nothing's ever gone wrong with you, first of all, talk to me again tomorrow. But there's certain people that have just been sun-blessed, somehow they've gotten to this stage in life and they are a little bit, they believe they're beloved unconditionally. But, the people in my audiences really get what I'm talking about are people who've gone through a horrible divorce, a bad diagnosis, the loss of somebody they love, a child that from whom they're estranged, until those things happen to us, our spirituality is inevitably very shallow.
Mm-hmm.
I know. Do we talk about Job here?
No, you're right. I call it the R factor of existence, the randomness, and how my personal belief is the older we get, how we choose, which is right out of Deuteronomy, how we choose to deal with the randomness of life, the things that we cannot control, determines the type of person we are. And it's
Right.
fascinating to me. I'm sure you had people in your sessions who, this person has a diagnosis or something tragic happens and they curl up and they reject everything. And the next person says, okay, I gotta deal with this. I'm going to deal with it and move on because I have a life to live. I have a bar mitzvah to go to. I have this thing on, and it's fascinating to me why the different people choose. If I have choose to make different choices in their life at a particular point. But yes, it goes to what you were talking about, control or the lack thereof, or the reality we don't control the real important stuff. And I'm very happy, as there's a silly juxtaposition. I agree with you. I'm glad you raised it, that there is an American myth of happiness. We got to be happy. As long as you're happy, whatever that heck that means. And I've now substituted it in classes and conversations with the idea of joy.
Mm.
That we take joy from moments of life. We may never. Happiness is this mythology. It's sort of like a Hollywood invention. Fade to black. The orchestra comes up. Everybody leaves the theater happy. Whatever. But moments of joy. It's like what you were talking about before. You go to their garden. It's contemplative. It brings you joy. Is it happiness? You still may be carrying a burden of this or a thought, but this moment brings me such joy looking at this flower, planting, watching it grow. How do you understand this difference between happiness and joy?
I'm going to have to back up a little bit to answer that because, you ask why is one person this way and another that way. I think we get triggered. And again, we have that whole childhood passage from birth on where we come up with coping mechanisms. And I have to say that that person you described, I'm both of them and I'm both in one day. So I find spiritual practice to not be one size fits all, done and over. It's every minute of every day. And especially in our times when every headline is horrifying and every visit to the doctor terrifying. Um, recently I've just done a lot of personal growth around the issue of worrying. My issue and many of our issues is worrying about the future. More so in these times and more so as I age. And just recently I had this breakthrough realization for myself that when I'm worrying, I'm already living in the catastrophic worst case scenario I can imagine. And I'm living it in the present moment. And so this thing that may or may not ever happen, I'm already living it. I'm feeling the feelings. My body is reacting. My heart is beating, and I realized before I said, I think 77 is old enough that I want to think that every moment is precious. So, there's a difference between prudent planning for the future and worrying. Prudent planning is using your logical, rational brain and it's saying, look at the options and it's coming up with the best plan possible. And it knows that there's no guarantees, but you make your plan and then you enact it as best you can, right? Worrying is when you have projected into the worst possible outcome, haven't even occurred to you, best possible outcome is even possible. You're living in the worst possible outcome, and it's rotating through your mind over and over and over again with no forward movement and no conclusion. So when I do that now, that rumination is what that is. When I find myself ruminating, I might indulge myself for a couple of minutes. Oh my God, the president said this, or the doctor said that, let yourself feel the feelings. And sometimes we have to grieve. And sometimes we know immediately what we need to do. There's some action we have to take. maybe we have to make an amends to somebody, or maybe we need to write a letter. Maybe there's something we can do, but there's just times when we don't. And then I get myself pretty quickly to the next thing, which is, do I want to dole away my future? Do I want to trade this future, which may or may not happen, for the worst possible present? And more often than not now, I say to myself, I can't control the future. The worst thing may happen, but it may not. So in this present moment, what can I do to take my mind off of what you're talking about? And honestly, I had a moment like this morning, and I shifted completely just because for some reason, and I think it's my own spiritual practice, I'm getting pretty good at it, and I read about it and write about it and talk to people like you about it. When I put my pants on, I thought, this is my favorite pair of pants. I love these pants. And then from there on, which blouse? I love this blouse, the zipper is so fun. I just got into the present moment, and most people, the clothes that they're wearing are things that they love. It can be as simple as that. And Florida Scott Maxwell, who was a wonderful author, she wrote a book called The Measure of My Days 50 years ago at the age of 85, in which she said the greatest joy for people of a certain age is creature comfort. Just take joy in creature comfort. And again, if you undermine it by feeling guilty because you ought to be doing something to save the world, or to something productive, or something that other people will judge differently, or so that it doesn't look lonely, you got a lot of junk in your brain. God calls us, and sometimes God calls us just to revel in creature comfort.
Yeah. I'm very happy you while you were talking about worrying, which hopefully is your next book, I was laughing and smiling because I heard the voice of my daughter, my wife, and my son, because I'm a worrier. I immediately go to DEFCON 4.
Yes, exactly.
Immediately. And they have constantly tried to tell me I'm getting better at it. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So thank you. And it comes from the impact of my mom and
right,
the way she
exactly.
looked at life. It's just a fascinating, because I have a big belief that family of origin issues that you alluded to, and the messages that we get when we're growing up, we carry them on for the rest of our life in a variety of different ways. Carol, Spiritual Aging, available the usual places,
yes,
and on Amazon bookstores, et cetera, et cetera?
Everywhere.
Okay. If somebody wants to reach out to you, do you have a website or something that you want to tell people about? Or
Sure. Two things. CarolOrsborn.com is my website. And just notice that my name Orsborn has a couple of R's in it. Orsborn. And I'm also have spiritual aging at Substack.com.
okay.
And if people come to Substack, there's a free subscription, and I blog and things like that, but they can also pay a small amount and get weekly study guides and be in a community of people online who are talking about each week's readings. Because I do believe that community is important. I made a big speech about contemplative practice, and I do believe that, but I find that it's very healthy to not isolate around issues of aging, and to be able to put it out there. A lot of people are embarrassed to say, my child never visits me, or, I hate to look in the mirror. So it's really great to be able to connect with other people and find out you're not the only one.
No, the community, that's why there's now research that you should join a religious faith community, because you'll live longer because you're in that community. And
that's right.
We're back doing a monthly, with a colleague of mine, just open forum on the issues that we deal with as we get older. And there's a congregation that I'm very close to. We also have a little circle of people who meet once a month just to do this. So and there's value in it. There's real value in just saying, yeah, I'm walking that walk too. And yeah, I had a little trouble getting out of bed this morning too.
Bad morning.
Anyway, Carol, thank you very, very much for today, and good luck with the book, and just give my regards to Toronto. Okay?
Thank you.
Just stay healthy. Just stay healthy. To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast and TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, if you'd like to reach out to us for any ideas or suggestions, please email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com and visit us on the website, jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big thank you to our tech guru and producer, Steve Lubetkin. Thank you again for joining us. We do appreciate your time. And until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning, take care of yourself, stay healthy, be well, enjoy life, and most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom. Thank you.